Hello. Hello, everyone. Oh, hi, Jess. How's it going? So, pretty much, I was inspired by a thread on my Facebook group that was really getting to the root at some conflict that is probably really common with TJs and FJs. And I was going to read some of those comments off as a way to spark discussion once a few more people join. But if you guys haven't seen my past couple live streams, I'm just trying to get more into the habit of doing them. I apologize for not letting you know in advance, but I will be here but I am happy to answer any questions / talk to you all. Just wanted to share briefly that, I used to bullet journal a lot, and I did a video about that recently, or not recently. I did a video about bullet journaling like over a year ago, and I got this really awesome planner for Christmas, so I stopped bullet journaling like in January 2019, and I have been trying to use this other planner, and I used it up until like maybe 2 or 3 months ago. I just started to drop off. And I decided to go back to bullet journaling, and I just did like the month of October. And I don't know if there are any other ENJs here or anyone who doesn't value SI, but I realized that I actually think that it's really helpful for me to actually draw out actively each month. Because it makes me feel completely responsible over my future. And I feel like it's way more motivating for me to be organized that way. So yeah, that's just something else that I've been thinking about lately, because my mind just feels very clear after that. And I made myself have like a list of like long-term goals and then also short-term goals. And since I had to look at October as a whole, I can then piece together which long-term goals should be considered in October and which ones shouldn't be considered in October. And that's just really nice, because I feel like I have been feeling behind, like so behind on everything lately, when really I'm not behind. It's just that my mind is getting ahead of myself, and my mind is running away into the future as opposed to being here. And I can trick myself into feeling like I'm behind, because maybe I'll have an idea of, oh, I want to offer this product, or I want to do this thing. I want to do this project with someone. And I think of it now, but really maybe it's not going to be ready until March of 2020. But because it's just at the back of my mind, if I don't write it down, or if I don't if I don't write it down, then it's going to be like knocking on my brain to get me to pay attention to it, which is just very distracting. So, yeah. I'm checking out your guys' comments now. Yeah, Edward says the fight between NI and appreciation for SE. Yeah, I think, okay, so like my bullet journal, I just like wrote this October thing, and then I like wrote out a list of, oh, that is completely upside down. And I wrote a list of all the days in October. It's like, it's almost like I can't use SI to be organized. I need to actually use SE to connect with it. Anyway, so since more of you guys are here, I'm going to just sort of get into what I was going to talk about with the title of this video. But if you guys have any other questions about cognitive functions and conflict, I can do that as well. So Jay and ENTJ on my Facebook page wrote a little bit about her experience getting to arguments with NFJs, and a nice sort of conclusion was reached that I think might be interesting to you all. Is that she says, as an ENTJ, I have lots of Ns as friends in my life. And this is just an observation that I have about disagreement and conflict. All NTs like to argue. They know this about each other and they don't take it personally. NPs will try and see both your perspective and then also offer yours, so both perspectives. And they only get upset if they feel that you violated their deep values, but they'll also explain what those values are. They demand that you respect their values, but will be okay if you don't see the same picture, because NE is like multiple perspectives. And then she says, at the risk of the barrage of Facebook comments, my experience with NFJs is very different, because in my experience, FJs don't like to argue, but unlike NFPs, they don't really allow the freedom to disagree. It's more like, hey guys, here's my really strong opinion, but if you disagree with me, I'm going to be very upset and then blame you for starting the argument, when in reality, I'm not allowing you to disagree. There's nothing that gets an NTJ going more than the combination of somebody controlling the dialogue and potentially being wrong. So I thought that that was a very well said and very valid complaint against NFJs. So I want to share that here. And sort of share my response to it and a couple things that others have said. Because, and I hope you guys know, oh no, this stopped. Oh, and I hope you guys know that I'm an ENFJ, and so that doesn't mean that NFJs aren't without any flaws. It doesn't mean that I'm here trying to defend, all NFJs. So I can only speak to my experience, but also I'm trying to speak to how FE works and how NI works. And so, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. Pretty much just that I understand that all types have flaws, and I find it really great when we're able to have discussions like this where we can sort of understand how our weaknesses might be perceived by other people, perhaps how some misunderstandings might be going on. Because I personally believe that misunderstandings are the number one reason why people, get in arguments. I tend to hone in on the ways that people misperceive more often than either misperceiving or misunderstanding. Two things there. I tend to hone in on how that causes conflict a lot more than how different values cause conflict. Although I understand that different values and different opinions also can cause conflict. I personally believe that if we understood each other more, and if we saw the same picture and could take the time to get on the same page, then there probably wouldn't even be nearly as much conflict. And I tend to assume that people they don't take enough time to really understand where the other person's coming from, and they will make assumptions about them. So anyway, since I read what she said, I'm going to share my response, and then if anyone has any other questions about some conflict and cognitive functions, let me know. So I said, for me, the intention isn't to discourage disagreement, but instead to discourage a discussion that lacks kindness and respect. I personally am not interested in arguing, but I am interested in hearing why other people think what they think. I'm interested in discussions. I'm extremely comfortable holding space for multiple views, but when an NFJ shuts down and they don't want to argue, it's probably because they feel misunderstood and they feel that any potential discussion is moot until both parties are interested in seeing the other side and feeling the other side. I'm not interested in arguing because I don't like things to be a zero-sum game. The best one wins. I'm interested in discussing to come to a brand new conclusion that includes insights from both parties. And if the other side is trying to get me to let go of my portion of the truth and trying to convince me that their portion of the truth is more true than my portion of the truth, then I probably will be done discussing because they won't be listening to me. And I said, another way of putting it is that if the emotional nature isn't allowing a respectful disagreement, then we won't continue the conversation. And then Jay, the ENTJ, said to me, yes. And when you guys shut down, it comes off as hurt FI, like that we're butthurt, and a rejection of any sort of TE. I think that NTJs feel like at that point that you don't care to hear them or other points. It feels like a rejection rather than trying to protect harmony. So that was really interesting for me to hear, because I think people talk a lot in the type community about FE being super pro harmony. And if an FE user does something that you don't perceive as harmonious, then people question whether or not that person is an FE user. But just as TE users might be trying to find like a conclusion that is true, doesn't mean that they're always right, and, doesn't mean that the strategy of an FJ is always going to lead to harmony. And me personally, I think that sometimes you need conflict and disharmony in order to get to real harmony and understanding. I'm going to check the comments. But yeah, okay, so one last thing I said back is I said, it's very interesting and helpful to hear your perspective. Thank you. It's very stressful how TE and FE can so often just cross wires and not really hear each other. I can't speak for all FJs, but my latent FI that gets hurt in those discussions, it's not hurt that somebody disagrees. I find the people disagreeing to be inevitable. But what can hurt is if it looks like somebody is being condescending towards me, if they are lacking curiosity about my point of view, or if they seem to be dismissing my points and my intelligence just because I don't have a well-sourced argument prepared at any given time. It takes a lot of effort for me to spell out why I think something, because it takes a long time for me to decide on an opinion to even begin with. I personally believe that in most cases that the FI that NTJs see us react to is our FI of feeling misunderstood, feeling stupid for not being able to explain ourselves, and also just feeling sad at the lack of connection and understanding that we feel between us and the other party. And it's not the same as how FPs can have FI about the conflict and FI about the fact that they don't want to face another TE point. The behavior might look similar. And yes, in a way, us NFJs are dismissing the TE, but not because we want to dismiss your point of view. But personally, I dismiss TE because I want to take the time to TI it first before I can speak on it or say anything in response to it. I'm not good at responding to facts in real time, but I'm not afraid of facts. It is intimidating because I feel like I know absolutely nothing unless I know 100%. An inferior TI in particular can make this a struggle because I'm sensitive and insecure about my ability to explain my thoughts, and I'm pretty slow at following new thoughts that I haven't thought of before because I need to validate each premise first before I can run with it. And it's a process of checking up each new fact up against everything that I've ever known and looking for inconsistencies before I can even move on or accept what someone is saying. So for example, if you share a TE fact that goes against what an FJ believes, then they will be triggered into looking into their shadow TI, and they will be forced to test their TI up against the new fact. They'll test your facts up against their current algorithm. We aren't constantly refining and updating our sense of truth the way that TPs are. So we will be slow and messy when it comes to sharing our opinions and updating our own, which is what leads to the emotional expression that you might see in conflict. We absolutely do not want to keep ourselves in a bubble, though, because that feels really wrong to FE, because I need to consider everyone's point in order to find universal truth. So to us, it could seem like NTJs or any TE user is being stubborn and closed-minded with their TI, which is a rejection of the FE harmony for seemingly no reason. So, yeah, I think that we do this thing in the type community where a TE user will notice the FI that other people feel, whether or not they're even aware of it, or like I'm going to be reacting to the TI and the FE that I see, whether or not that's something that is even of interest to the person. So Heather Bryant says, have you ever noticed FI users projecting their own emotions or values onto others when attempting to emphasize in the absence of FE? Yes. I do think that it's easy I think that TJs, they might be less aware of what their FI is and not really aware of how it's controlling the show. But FPs are going to be a lot more aware of that FI. But I guess to answer that, though, is that I feel like we're all sort of projecting our own worldviews on each other all the time, and it's important to recognize that, or else we won't be really aware of our own biases. Is that, yeah, like an FI users tend to think that my FE expression is coming from an FI place. And, I misread TE sometimes, and I can think that it's coming from this really stubborn TI when sometimes it's not. Sometimes the TE user just wants me to consider like a fact that they have found, or that they believe, or that, something that they think should be considered. So Jess says, I'm able to discuss things with people who disagree unless they're not being respectful. And that's when emotions come into play. I'm the exact same way. And Jess is a ISTP, so we do share the same functions. And I do think that that is probably the issue that an NTJ would have with an NFJ if they were arguing, is that NTJs don't really think about making sure that there is a nice emotional environment. So, but I have to realize that just as it's hard for me to like make an argument that and like source all of these facts, it's like that sounds like such a chore to me. I don't want to do it. Like it doesn't mean that. I just would rather somebody else do it. Doing my own research and crafting an argument from point A, point B, it's just a lot of extra effort to me, and I don't need to think something at all times. I'm okay with not knowing. I'm okay with just holding on to zero opinion and just seeing what happens. Whereas, other types might not be that way. So I guess what I'm saying is that I have to have empathy for the fact that it's very difficult for NTJs to create a warm emotional environment. Not because they don't like care about you. And in the past, especially before I knew type, I assumed that NTJs wouldn't, or really all TJs, I assumed that the reason why they weren't putting their emotions or creating a warm environment was because they didn't care, which is not true. That's just not what they're focused on, which, as Jess just said, both probably want to be respected, but in different ways, or have a different idea of what respect is. I definitely agree with that. And I think that no matter what type you are, you're probably focused on your dominant function and thinking, that is respect. And if somebody is dismissing that completely, then that doesn't feel respectful because that is what you see as your being. And that's why, in socionics, if you look at the intertype relations, your conflictor is the type that their dominant function is your blind spot, and vice versa. And the reason why you conflict is because you're quite literally dismissing their reality just as you're waiting. So for me, my conflictor is the ISTJ. And, ISTJs, they are completely dismissing the need for FE, and I'm completely dismissing the need for SI. And that doesn't mean that I can't ever get along with an ISTJ, but just my way of being, I put SI dead last. I ignore it. And so that is very stressful. Like, we both are going to view each other as, why are you spending so much time on that, which is the least important thing, yet you aren't paying attention to the important thing. It's important to realize this is the game that we're all doing because, one thing isn't even more important than the other. It's just your subjective view. Like, it's unfair for me to look at an ISTJ and think that they're wasting their time on things that don't matter because they think the same thing about me. And that's just how it is. So Cedric says, when people aren't respectful, I just start asking questions because people like that usually know what they think. I want to understand how they think and feel. Is that something you can even do? So, Cedric, I believe you're a TP, an ENTP perhaps. Let me know. But what I think is that I could do that. I just don't really think to sometimes. Like, it depends on the situation. And obviously I was respectful in the comments back to her. So I have learned a lot about how to use type to not make so many assumptions. And I think I've come a long way. But if somebody's not curious about me, it's very hard for me to try and be curious back. But I agree that is a good strategy in any sort of conflict, no matter what type you are, is just to start asking questions and to start listening. Because when two people just start going full speed ahead with their own perspective, then that could be really stressful. Because then it can be very quickly, both parties could just feel not heard and give up. So asking questions is a very good tip. Okay. I'm sort of scrolling up. Cedric said earlier, you should just write down a list of cool stuff that you want to do sometime, and when you don't know what to do, just do one of them. Yeah, I do have sort of like a wish list thing that I have written here. Although, typically in my life these days, I am too busy. So, really, a lesson that I have been really teaching myself lately is the fact that rest is a part of my mission. If I don't rest, if I don't care for my body, then I can't do anything. And I know that sounds obvious, maybe, but I still don't do it, even though I've had that realization. So, Darth, what is your type? I'm curious. Darth says, when people are disrespectful, I'm just like, walk away in silence. I think that for me, as soon as someone feels like they're being disrespectful, I do decide that I want to end the conversation. But even then, I tend to start to focus on like, oh, but they might not be doing it on purpose, or you know, or like, oh, if I cower. Sometimes I think things like, oh, if I end the conversation or if I cower, then they're going to think that they've won, when really they didn't win. And like, I don't know if that makes sense. It's like I never even want to get into any of those games of win and lose, like the zero sum game. Like, who was it that said, oh, professional victim says the truth is always in the middle. I agree that it's either in the middle or it's just a perspective that includes both of their perspectives, or it's a new perspective that neither of them thought of. So, bye, Jess. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. I think that the truth is going to have to at least include the points or the perspective of the other person. So even if somebody is dead wrong, which that is possible, people can be dead wrong, the emotion that they're reacting to that inspired that thought probably still deserves to be validated or seen or understood. So, oh, hi, Taylor. We were getting worried. Yeah. What was I even saying? Oh, back to what Darth said about when people are disrespectful. It's like I recognize that people are disrespectful, but sometimes I overestimate my ability to change their way of being. Because I still like just my fundamental assumption is that if somebody is being rude or whatever, that they probably are doing it unintentionally. I don't know. So it could be hard for me to know how to set boundaries. Oh, I know what I was saying is that I don't like to view things as a zero sum game as like I win, you lose. I only want to look for like win win scenarios. And so sometimes I do get confused when there is a disagreement and people aren't being respectful. I don't know when to drop it, or I don't know when to end, because maybe somebody's trying to argue, maybe they're trying to debate two different points in order to test their thoughts and learn something new. But maybe what I'm trying to do is get to the core of who they are and have a real heart-to-heart discussion about what led us to believe both the things that we believe. And I will be trying to nudge the conversation in that direction, and they might be trying to nudge me to share my facts. And that just can end badly. And that's why sometimes it's just helpful to share what your intention is in any conversation. So Perry says, do you think that the win and lose game is unhealthy TE? Because I think I notice this more with TE users for some reason. I do think so. I would venture to say that gammas, so anyone with SE and NI and TE and FI, are probably the most likely to view situations as win or lose. But I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you don't view it in that way. I just know that, at least for me, I just refuse to play that game. And for some reason, whenever I refuse to play that game of win-lose, sometimes it looks like I am actually being stubborn, and sometimes it can actually come off completely the wrong way, where it seems like I'm sort of self-righteously leaving the discussion as though I think that I know better than them. But that's not it. It's just that if there's no, as a FE Dom, if there's no fundamental curiosity, respect, that there's not like this mutual flow, then I just tend to feel like the conversation will probably require more effort than I would gain. So Hambone says, what do you mean by facts, like statistics? It could include statistics. Really, I was trying to use a word to describe how it could be stressful for me to use TE, as in spelling out my thoughts in arguments. And, you know, it does seem like TE users are more cool with the flow of this is what I think, or this is something to consider, or like a fact, whether or not it's actually true. It's just like sort of here's a fact, or here I don't know what. If there's any TJs here, what's a word that you would use for that? Because I feel like the word fact has sort of a connotation of it being true, where, and I guess this is sort of showing how skeptical I am of TE, is that just because so and so said it, or just because there's a study, or just because you think it's true, or just because an authority came to this conclusion, I don't necessarily think that it's true, and I'm really not really swayed by anything like that. Like, at the end of the day, I only think things if I have done my own research, like, thoroughly. And so, as I was saying earlier, I'm totally cool with thinking nothing. I'm totally cool with not knowing what I think at all about most things. So, Heather says, I find often when people act disrespectful, it's because they anticipate being disrespected and get defensively hostile. But if you can disarm that fear, they usually change their tone. That's very true. And I think that can sort of be why sometimes for me as an ENFJ, it's hard to know when to drop it, because my strategy is always like, how can I disarm the fear? How can I let them know I'm a friend and not a foe? When sometimes that can just seem pushy. It could seem like, get the hell out of the way. Like, who are you? So, that's difficult. Golden says, do you think that the FITE versus FETI conflict affects the Jungian typology community in any way? Yes, absolutely. I feel like it is almost ironic how often these same conflicts happen amongst us, amongst a community that in many ways should know better. You can argue that we should know better, because we should be able to use, in theory, this tool of personality typology to better understand others and to better communicate ourselves and to better understand conflict. But I think that the issue is that Carl Jung, when he came up with these cognitive functions, he was just sort of sharing philosophically about them. And, he died before he got to really get to the point where he really fleshed out, like, this is how you use them. This is how you type people, all of that. And so it's like he inspired so much thought in us talking about personality. But, the MBTI is mostly used for corporate, of like, this is what job you should do. And that doesn't solve conflicts. And so MBTI might have lots of resources for certain things, but I think that in order to really know what to do with this information we have, we're going to need to sort of come together and look at the functions and say, okay, so now that I know our type, how do we prevent these stupid conflicts that happen time and time again? Like, it's going to take intentionally looking at that and telling people, how do you apply this? Because I think in the type community, everyone is applying it differently. Some people are applying it for personal reasons, personal development. Some people are more focused on using it to improve their interpersonal relationships. Some of us are going to use our type to make excuses. I might say, an unhealthy ENFJ or an unhealthy version of myself might just say, like, I don't care that you need space. I need to be validated externally, or else I won't, be able to understand how you feel for me or something. I don't know. I might think, oh, well, my thinking isn't that great. So whatever, I don't have to be accurate, or I don't have to think about the implications. I think we see this often, mostly with a stereotypical idea would be thinking of a thinker saying, well, I'm a thinker, so I don't have to sound nice or whatever because I'm focused on the facts, you know. And we do this, and we could use MBTI that way, or we can use the cognitive functions to really understand uh, how to mend these conflicts. So yes, I do think that this conflict, and oh, what I'll say is that I think that a difference in the perceiving functions leads to different perceptions of the conflict, where a difference in the judging function will lead to a different sort of priority or a different standard. So if I, as a beta, so an NFJ or an STP, were to be talking to a gamma who uses the same perceiving functions but a different judging function, SFPs and NTJs, what would happen is that we typically are seeing the same picture, but the standards that we're judging the situation on are going to be different. And I might be angry that they aren't meeting the sort of standard of respect that my FE sees, but then they might be angry that I'm not meeting this standard of trying to prove that what I'm saying is reliable and valid. I pretty much expect everybody to do their own guessing and checking of what I'm saying. Like, I don't want anyone to just take my word for it ever. You know, that's why I don't feel a need to prove my facts. Like, I'm just talking. This is my conclusion. You have your own, you know, and, that's why I can get along with TPs pretty well because they already are guessing and checking what I'm saying. Like, if you're a TP watching this, you probably don't agree with 100% of what I've said, but that's okay. Like, you're just taking the pieces that you agree with and, leaving the rest. Bosman Big says, a fact itself is true, but may not represent the truth of the matter or an overall truth. Yes, and I think that, NFJs getting in conflict with NTJs, it could be that they are saying a fact and they want me to consider it, whereas for me, I'm thinking, oh, that fact isn't representative of the overall truth, but then I won't really know how to explain it. I'll just get emotional. Oh my God. So Cedric says, no, Megan, you aren't allowed to see my heart. You can't expect me to let you see what makes things matter to me. Well, sorry, because I just am psychic like that. And I can guess about things. Just kidding. I'm not saying I literally. Cedric also says, well, I often admire people I disagree with very much because I can see that they are really trying to do well. Often I feel inferior to them because they're better at representing their ideals. Yeah, I think that's what can keep me going at an argument or a disagreement for longer than maybe some would say it should, is because if I can see that somebody has good intentions, or if I just want to believe that somebody has good intentions, I can even just trick myself into thinking someone has good intentions, or like want to know, like, what is that heart that is motivating you, Heather says, I agree. That's why I don't believe in censorship or telling people don't listen to so-and-so. I think people can decide for themselves what makes sense and what's true. It's their responsibility. I completely agree with that. And, something about censorship that is interesting to me that I was thinking about is that any form of censorship, what I find really ironic is that whether it's happening on the left or the right, if somebody thinks, oh, you shouldn't be allowed to say that, imagine if they were to make that into law and then the parties were going to flip and then the other party was in charge. 9 times out of 10, it's like they don't actually want that law to be applied unless they are the ones applying it. there's no way to literally, it's like when people want to censor something, they're wanting to censor the thing that they don't like. And if the tables were to turn and the people that they don't like were to get in power, then it would go right back. It would bite them in the ass. And because the thing is that any form of censorship means that there's somebody in power doing the censoring. So it's like people only are okay with censoring if they're imagining them in power doing it. But it's literally impractical to think that that could work, because who is doing the censoring? Who? Like, there's always an authority that is implied that may or may not have your best interest. Flow State says, I also disagree with censorship. However, if someone's spewing BS, yes, CSJ, I think I have a social duty to warn people. I completely agree. And I think that warning people is, enacting upon your free speech as well. And it's trying to believe that it's trying to believe that it's like the marketplace of ideas, even though it might not always be true. The idea of the marketplace of ideas is that the best ideas rise to the top. The thing is if C.S. Joseph is allowed to say things that people disagree with, even if you think it's harmful, then Flow State is allowed to make videos about why it's stupid, And every time that I, speak out against things that I disagree with, I'm like, I never want the other person to shut up, because then it's hypocritical, because it would mean that I would not want to, like, I'm thankful for the ability to be able to say this person's stupid, And, professional victim ass should not be censored. I think that hate speech should have consequences, like all speech should have consequences, but anytime that you are trying to eliminate it implies that there's somebody in power that is in charge of deciding what's okay, what's not. And yeah. And it's like, I'm very leftist, and people might say I'm pretty PC, but that's all socially. That's all my own opinion. That's all, like, I'm using the words that I want to use, and I can socially, like, maybe I won't want to be your friend if you say something, but I would never eliminate your ability to say it. Yeah, Flow State says the problem with censorship is it doesn't eliminate the sentiment. It just forces it into hiding. Yeah, people need to express themselves, or else it's going to fester and turn, like, to darkness. I think that's honestly what's happening in America right now, is that a lot of our darkness is being brought to light that has been there. People are meeting like-minded people more frequently. And, it's creating all these pockets of people. It's like people, their emotions feel validated by these people that, sorry, it says that my connection's unstable, so I'm hoping that this is working right now. So let me know if that, messed up. Sorry. I think that people are finding people that are echoing their ideas, and that's what's creating these echo chambers. But then it's like, these ideas need to be validated in order for it to merge. I don't know. So Bossman Bing says, not only in America right now, but in humanity since the beginning. I completely agree. I'm just speaking from a very American-centric, I really hate how America just be like that and just, like, think about itself all the time, but it's just what I have. Flow State says censorship fails for the same reason socialism does. There's no entity that's altruistic and selfless enough to oversee the system. And the thing is that even if there are people that are altruistic and selfless, there's kind of no way to monitor that. And also, there's kind of no way to get people to agree on that. So, God damn it. You're just, these ESTPs just trying to get to see your reaction. And I don't know how to literally not give a reaction. So, Darth Silas says, you don't watch MSNBC. I don't watch any TV news right now because I used to watch it way too much. And now I'm focused on impacting my sphere in the best way I can. I don't want to waste my time impacting something that, or thinking that I would rather focus on what I can control. That's what I'm trying to say. Brendan says, I'm a bit behind on the live stream. I'm an INTJ, and my view is that truth exists independently of anyone's opinion. One or both parties can be wrong, but they can't both be right. Yeah, I think that if somebody has a feeling, it came from somewhere, like objectively. It's not like it just came from nowhere. Even if it's completely illogical, there's a reason why it got there. And so if you don't talk about it, then it's going to just fester and then sort of influence the rest of your idea of truth. So, and by the way, Brendan, at the beginning of this live stream, I talk very in depth about NTJ and ENFJ disagreements. So you might want to check that out later. Because the conversation has sort of veered into censorship. Censors. Just kidding. So, but yeah. What do you mean by those people aren't friendships? You probably shouldn't force place then. Okay, Brennan says your statement that a person's feelings deserve to be validated even if they're factually wrong was a very interesting way of thinking about truth. So, for example, sexism is a thing. You can look it up sociologically. You can look it up, whatever. I might have the feeling that certain things are unfair against me because I'm a woman, because of the reality of sexism. But in every given moment, my feeling might not literally be true. But unless I am told that it's valid for me to feel that way, there's no way to move forward. So hopefully, like, that makes sense, is that my feeling of feeling like because I'm a woman, XYZ is valid, but it's not always true. So, I don't know. And sometimes a very real feeling based on a very real issue could be warping truth in other areas. A very real emotion that needs to be acknowledged might be making you completely irrational and making other decisions. So, for example, if someone was sexually harassed at work, maybe they would have a very real emotion about that would then lead them to be irrational about another activity at work. And so, without acknowledging the root emotion that is anyone's feeling, I don't really see how you could arrive at the true conclusion. And as an FE Dom, that's just always been my strategy. But it doesn't mean that it's the only way. It's just the way I view things. So Flow State says, it's very unnatural for me to feel an emotion is valid unless it's founded on if it's founded on untruth. It's because for whatever reason it showed up. Like, even if it's just something like, and okay, I understand that this is sort of like your FI blind spot talking, but like, for example, so this is something that my dad told me, who, oh, hey, Pensifine. Okay, so this is something that my dad told me that I think is a really good example, is that my dad is a twin. And he told me that he remembers, because he's an ENFJ and his brother is an ESTJ, and they're very different. And my ESTJ uncle was always sort of the wild child, or like breaking the rules or whatever. Like, he was just a more stubborn kid. And I guess when they used to take a nap, my mammy, my grandma, would like hold my she would hold my uncle and not my dad, because she trusted that my dad would stay asleep, and she didn't trust that my uncle wouldn't run away. But I guess my dad got the idea that that meant that she loved him more. So that's an example of a feeling that's valid that isn't true. Is that he knows that he had that feeling, and then he processed it and talked to her about it. But like, that is an example of how a situation can give you the impression of something that causes a feeling that, if you're not careful, you can cause feelings like that all the time. And if you address them, then you can clear the issue. But if you don't address them, then it completely allows that emotion to cloud truth. And that's why it's so important to, in my opinion, both discover your emotions and also be willing to see the truth and be willing to let go of some of those emotions. So, okay, so Pensifine says, I struggled for a long time as an INFP with a friendship with an FE user who is probably an Enneagram 9. Yeah. Do you have a specific question or anything to share, Pensifine, about how that worked? Because I would love to touch on that, because I relate to that as an FE user. I've had issues with INFPs, but I also, as an Enneagram 2, I actually have a hard time with Enneagram 9s, because in conflict, I want to discuss, like, I want to help. I want to bridge the gap. And a lot of times 9s want to shut down and pretend like there's no problem, which is not what I do. So Brendan says, moral truths are very tricky to deal with compared to sensory or logical truth. Yes, completely agree. So Miss Creative Amber says, how are we to know what's right or necessary moving forward if we don't address the heart or mind of both? Compassion doesn't choose sides, it's open to growth. Yes, I completely agree. What is your type, Miss Creative Amber? Because that's pretty similar to what I was saying in the beginning, is that that's why I can seem as though to certain TE users or whoever, that I'm not interested in other opinions, when really I'm just not interested in there being a lack of compassion. So Pensifine says 2 and 9 both want peace, but the way that we want it is different, because I feel very unloved if somebody tries to ignore me. And like, if there's a problem between a 2 and a 9, then if the 9 shuts down, then the 2 thinks, oh, you don't love me. And then the 2 starts yelling and screaming and disintegrating to 8. So Pensifine says he was far too passive. I wanted to discuss issues, and he didn't want to initiate. I'm pretty sure he was an NFJ Enneagram 9, while I'm an INFP Enneagram 4. Yeah, and Z says, how would I, as an INFP, be able to help my ENFJ friend open up more about her personal feelings? So since both of these questions are both from INFPs about FE users, I'm going to just sort of answer them both together. And I would say that if you want an FE user to open up with you, you have to use FE to explicitly share and explicitly create that space and like say, hey, I want you to share with me. I want you to know that you won't be judged. I want you to know this is a safe place. I want you to know that I want to know your opinions, even if they're unpopular. I want to know what is going through your heart right now, even if it's uncomfortable. I promise that I won't betray you, whatever. So that's not going to solve all of it, but that sort of statement is sort of necessary for FE, because even if they get really close to you, they still might not want to burden you. And they might need to be told, hey, I want to hear. But another thing just to keep in mind for you, like INFPs, is that so ENFJs, I'm FI ignoring. And, IFJs are FI critic. So it's different. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how that works for them. But for me, a lot of times, especially when I was younger, I would say things like, I'm sad, but I don't know why. Or like, I feel weird, but I don't know why. And like, I don't naturally know exactly what I'm feeling. I know the general sense, and I know where I want to go. And I use these emotions, or I'm like aware of the emotions around me, but I don't always know what I'm feeling. And so I would just also say to you INFPs to not take it personally if an FJ isn't sharing, because that doesn't mean that they don't want to, and that also doesn't mean that they don't feel comfortable around you. They just might need you to tell them it's okay, or maybe for you to ask and pull it out of them, because it's not very natural for an FE user to want to share their FI. So, I mean, I need lots of coaxing. Like, even with my best friend who's an ENFP, like, I don't really volunteer, like, things like that. I will talk about my general feeling and my general day and like general moods, but I don't just it's hard for me to. I mean, I do feel control with my ENFP friend, but I don't know. That sort of FE needs to be established first. Or somebody needs to ask, like, oh, how does that make you feel? NFPs, especially type 4s, will sort of volunteer how they feel and be okay with like monologuing about themselves, which I don't mind. I love hearing it, but personally, I don't want to be a burden, and so that can be very difficult. So Bossman Biggs says, since compassion can be subjective, that's why the bare truth is important too, because without the subjectivity of emotion attached to it. That's the thing, is that I think that both truth and the emotion can be both subjective and objective, and so it's important to try and acknowledge both, because there is a capital T truth and there's also a capital C compassion, or capital R respect, or whatever you want to call it. Like, at least for me as an FE Dom, I view things as respectful and disrespectful as very black and white. And I don't really know how to convey how that is. They just look like polar opposites to me. And I don't feel like whenever I do that, it's based on my interpretation, but everything is, up to interpretation, but I do think FE tries its best to sort of be a bird's eye view on that. So, yeah. So, Pensive Fine says, since I know I'm able to work out my own emotions and I think I can help him, you definitely could. Um, Another thing that you can do to try and get an NFJ to open up is if you're an NFP and you're talking about your own emotions, you can ask a question like, have you ever felt this way before? Or has that ever happened to you? Or like, would you react this way if you were in my shoes? I think that saying something like that can really spark an FI reaction from them. They'd be more than happy to share. They just probably won't volunteer that information because they won't be really aware of it. So, anyway, guys, I feel like I'm going to end this live stream and comment below. Like, I want to start doing live streams every Monday. I've done it the past 3 times, and I apologize for not letting you guys know in advance. Let me know if that's something that you want, if you want it to me to let you know in advance, or if there's a specific time. But, oh, hi, Andy. Yeah, sorry, I'm just about to end, actually. So you can watch the replay, you guys. And if you're an NTJ, like Andy is, the beginning has a really great conversation. I just was sharing of a conversation I had with an NTJ where we really conveyed how we can misperceive each other. So, yeah, I will, let you guys know next time that I will be going live next Monday. So thank you guys so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.